Good morning, everybody. I'm Navin Girishankar. I'm the president of the Economic Security and Technology Department here at CSIS, newly created. EST is what we're called. We have a singular mission, which is to provide strategic insights and policy solutions for the United States and our partners to sustain economic and technology advantages that will be essential to our long-term prosperity, the security of our economies and democracy, and the resilience of our societies from global threats. An important tool for the United States in doing that are export controls, meaning controls on exports of sensitive goods and technology that can be put to malign purposes, such as weapons of mass destruction, proliferation, military applications, terrorism, and human rights abuses. These controls are only as good as our ability to enforce them. And so day in and day out, the Bureau of Industry and Standards is hard at it in enforcing these controls. And we're really pleased to have Assistant Secretary Matt Axelrod, who is a former colleague now that I'm out of government and a good friend. Assistant Secretary Axelrod and a cadre of special agents and analysts that are part of his team are focused day in and day out on enforcing these controls and helping keep sensitive technology out of the hands of the world's most dangerous actors. And so therefore it's a critical pillar of U.S. economic security. Assistant Secretary Axelrod has had a long career, not only his ongoing stint at the Commerce Department, but previous to that at DOJ, and obviously was also a district attorney in Florida, federal with the DOJ, but importantly with the White House even before then. So a very long parkour across federal government. He's one of our really valuable public servants, and we're really pleased to have him here with us today. He's got a lot to share with us, including some recent actions that BIS has taken and policies. So we're looking forward to this conversation. Of course, we have Bill Reinsch, our chair in business and economics, the Scholl Chair, who will have a fireside chat with Matt. Bill is also of our Trade Guys podcast fame, which many of you listen to. I'm a fan of it as well. So I'm really looking forward to this discussion. Thank you, Bill and Matt. I'm going to invite you to the stage as I get off, but I'm really looking forward to this. Thank you.
Well, welcome everybody. Welcome to our people that are here in person, and welcome to the people that are online. We're going to have a discussion, and then we'll have time at the end for questions. So plan ahead and think of questions if you've got any. I just want to add a note, having also in the very distant past been at BIS. I just mentioned today. Well, now this is an election year, and one of the things that happens in election year is that everybody in Washington learns or discovers something called the Plum Book, which is a recent edition of the Plum Book named after its color. This is the book that contains every position in the United States government that the president can fill. So if you're a Washington office holder wannabe, the Plum Book is essential. Matt's job is in it. Well, it gets better. More interesting, I didn't bring it with me, but more interesting is there used to be also something called the Prune Book. And the Prune Book was a list of all the government jobs that are hard, difficult, and demanding that require actual credentials in order to fill. And Matt's job is in that one as well. And I think we are very lucky to have somebody with his experience and insight and vision, I think, to fill a job that has become increasingly important. And particularly right now, where it's right at the center of so much of what we do as far as economic security is concerned. I always get offended when people refer to BIS as a backwater, because when I was there, I didn't think it was, but it certainly isn't now. as I think we're going to hear. They've been very busy, and we may actually commit a little news later on because the department has done something this morning that's noteworthy. So with that, let's get started. We'll have a conversation. As I said, we'll have time at the end for questions. So let's begin with the big picture. You're the Assistant Secretary for Export Enforcement, which is part of the Bureau of Industry and Security. Tell us what your responsibilities are. What do you do?
Yeah, thanks, Bill, and thanks to Navin as well for the generous introduction. Thanks to CSIS for having me, and thanks to all of you for being here with us today. So I see our role on the export enforcement side at BIS as keeping our country's most sensitive technologies out of the world's most dangerous hands. That's our mission, and more specifically, that means that these dual-use items, right? So items capable of ordinary civilian use, but also capable of military use. That's what we're concerned about and where we do our work. We do that in a variety of ways. My team is mostly made up of federal law enforcement agents, so people with badges and guns that have like a singular mission, which is to enforce the nation's export laws, to protect those sensitive technologies, and they do investigations, and then we work, of course, if it's a criminal violation, with prosecutors at the Department of Justice. If it's an administrative violation, we work with lawyers at the Commerce Department to hold violators accountable. We also have analysts that work in my shop, and they are the ones who help the agents. They cut leads out to them to go investigate. They comb through classified and open source information to figure out what companies are posing sort of national security or foreign policy risk and need to be nominated to go on our entity list, which is a restricted party list, makes it harder to get U.S. exports. And so that's who we are. That's what we do. We're small. As Bill knows, having been in charge. My guess, we could do the numbers game. My guess is we have not grown that much since you were the undersecretary with us, and certainly not as much as I think would be needed to keep up with today's threat environment, which I'm sure we'll talk about.
Well, that leads me to the next question. Things have gotten, I don't want to say worse, but you are much more at the center of policy and policy making. The whole Bureau is. Because what they're enforcing are the export control policies that the department and ultimately the president have implemented. So they're part of a much larger team, and they have to work closely with the people that grant the licenses and help deal with the policy. But to say a little bit about how the national security environment has changed and the extent to which it's made your job more difficult.
Yeah, so I think we're at a bit of a national security inflection point. Yesterday, as everyone knows, was 23 years since 9/11. In the wake of 9/11, one of the recommendations to come out of the 9/11 Commission was to create the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. And ODNI every year, starting in 2006, puts out a global threat assessment. It catalogs the greatest national security threats facing the United States. They're all available online. You can go look at them and read them. If you don't want to sleep much at night, you can go check them out. But the very first one was 2006, so 5 years after 9/11. No surprise, the whole front of that report was about the threat of terrorism by non-state actors like Al-Qaeda. The discussion of Russia in that 2006 report did not appear until page 16. The discussion of China not until page 20. Contrast that with this year's report, and you will see a stark shift. The whole front section of this year's report is all about the threat from nation-state actors: China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. Terrorism, of course, is still a threat and still something the U.S. government spends lots of resources to prevent. But the nation-state actor threat has increased significantly, and one dimension of that threat is the desire of those nation-states to obtain sensitive U.S. technology in order to advance their military capabilities. When you think about technologies like hypersonics, right? And I'm no expert, but my understanding is like hypersonic weapons, like a normal missile, right? Goes up in the air and a parabola comes down, and that allows missile defense systems time to try and shoot it out of the sky. That's what we're seeing going on in Ukraine. When Russia fires some missiles, that's how the missile defense systems are working. Hypersonic weapons, though, fly much closer to the ground, and they are much more maneuverable, which makes it much harder for missile defense systems to shoot them down. So whoever gets there first on hypersonics has a huge sort of advantage in the sort of current and future battlefield tactics. That's why it's so important to us, so important to the United States, that those technologies be protected, because the U.S. is the leader in a number of them, and that they not go to our adversaries, and that our military is the one that's able to develop those capabilities in order to maintain the balance of power in the world. We're, as you said, Bill, like our work was, of course, relevant during the post 9/11 days. We want to make sure U.S. technologies aren't ending up in the IEDs that were killing U.S. soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan. But our mission now is really sort of spot on match for this significant national security challenge. And so I think the importance of our work has increased significantly.
You've made a number of policy changes over the past few years, including on voluntary self-disclosures and other disclosure issues. Say a little bit about, what those are for the audience that may not know what a VSD is, and if you can, comment on how this has affected the industry. Has it changed anybody's behavior?
Sure.
Or is everybody still the same?
Yeah. So given the sort of significance of the threat picture, and I think the importance of our work to combat it and how it shifted over the years, we recently have taken a hard look at our policies to make sure they're fit for purpose. In other words, the landscape has changed, the importance of our tools have changed. Let's make sure we're using them in a way that has maximum impact, especially since we don't have all that many people to do it. So we have to figure out ways to make sure we're squeezing every last drop out of our capabilities. So as you said, over the last 2 years, we've changed our policies on voluntary self-disclosures. Those are when a company sort of internally realizes that they sort of slipped up and that the sensitive item that wasn't supposed to go somewhere outside of the United States actually went. We want them to come tell us that happened. And we provide incentives for companies to do that. And for a long time, it's been clear that if you come in to us, in other words, you knock on our door before we knock on yours, you get concrete benefits. We will treat you better. You get a reduction in penalty. We consider that sort of heavily. It's just a very different posture. But we made a couple of changes to sort of sharpen that sort of decision making, because companies often, when they find that something went where it wasn't supposed to, they don't want to come tell the government, right? Like they tell the government, like we might actually take some action. And so we did a couple of things. One, first of all, we want companies and our agents and analysts focusing their finite resources on the most important violations. So we set up a 2-track processing system. In other words, if you have some minor technical thing, right, you checked one code, it should have been another, it's no big deal. We want you to tell us, but we don't want you to spend a lot of time on it. You can do an abbreviated disclosure, and we only need, you can bundle them all, tell us once a quarter. If you tell us something significant, that's where we want you to do. That's going to take, and if you do the minor technical, we'll get you an answer back, a warning letter, no action letter, 60 days. If you tell us something more significant, we're going to spend more time on it. We're going to assign an agent and an enforcement attorney. So we're spending our resources the right way, and we want companies to also. As part of that, so that was a change. Another change was that if you find a significant violation at your company, and you make the decision not to tell us, and we later find out, we're going to hold that against you. If we find out, we're going to consider an aggravating factor in determining what the penalty should be. And then the third, I think most significant clarification was we want not only self-disclosures, we want disclosures about other people too, right? If you're a company and you're playing by our rules and your competitor isn't and keeps selling items to the place they're not supposed to sell, we don't want you to suffer in silence. We want you to come tell us. And then if we're able to bring an enforcement action against the other company that's violating our rules, you get credit with us. We consider it extraordinary cooperation. If you ever get in trouble with us, we'll remember that down the road. So these policies, to your question, have been working. I ran the numbers in advance of this, had the team run the numbers in advance of our talk here today. And if you compare the 12 months before those policies were in place and the 12 months after, we've seen a nearly 30% increase in disclosures to us of significant violations, of voluntary self-disclosures of the significant violations, the more important ones, which is what we want. And we've seen nearly a 20% increase in industry tips coming in that have led to actionable leads being sent out to our agents in the field. So that's great too. Both of those changes are changes we're happy with. We take that as evidence that our policies are working, and that's why, we'll make hopefully a little news today. So this morning, we amended the Export Administration Regulations, right, in the Code of Federal Regulations to enshrine these policies in our regulations. They were new policies that we had rolled out over the last couple of years under my signature, policy memos, but we want these to be institutionalized, to be part of the fabric of our federal regulations, and so we've made those amendments and changes and revisions, and those are now in the Federal Register as of this morning.
Say a word, if you can, about the full, the proportion of different kinds of violations. I mean, the VSDs have to do with more or less, mostly unintentional mistakes or efforts to cover up unintentional mistakes and not get in trouble with you. But there are also the people that are doing this intentionally, that are organizing to try to bring prohibited items out of the United States and into Iran or Russia in particular. What proportion of your total activity is that, the criminal bad guy element?
Yeah, so for the voluntary self-disclosures, still the overwhelming majority of them are on the first of those two tracks I described. In other words, they're the more minor technical ones. We get about 500 voluntary self-disclosures a year, which is a lot. But most of them, north of, I don't have the exact number, it's definitely north of 90%, it may be well north of 90% are the minor technical ones. But that's why we put these policy changes in place. In other words, we don't want to be spending time, precious time, crunching through and really diving deep on, 500 minor technical violations. We want to triage those so we can, make sure, we want people to tell us it for the unintentional mistake, but we want to be able to get an answer back quickly within 60 days so that the company's not spending a ton of time on that, we're not spending a ton of time. We want compliance departments spending most of their time trying to find either the intentional violations by someone in the company, or maybe it was inadvertent, but it was still serious, right? You can have inadvertent mistake, but still, if you're sending, cutting-edge AI chips to China, that's something we care a lot about, and we want to know about it, and we'll take appropriate action.
I want to pursue that, but let's sort of go through in order, in the sense that really a lot of what you're doing involves corporate enforcement, because it is the companies, in fact, that make the stuff that is controlled. And so if something is leaving the country, it's probably leaving the country from an American company going someplace, sometimes to a place it shouldn't be, or sometimes through a much more circuitous path, which is what I want to get to. But well, let's just get to that right now. How do you deal with the multiple intermediary problem? So the U.S. company exports something pursuant to a license that was granted. It goes to that place. It goes to that end user in the UAE, just to pick one. And then, 3 months later, you discover it's not there anymore. It's in Russia. And how easy is it, or is it even possible to track the path and then figure out what to do about it when you're dealing with a bunch of intermediaries that are not American and are not American companies?
Yeah, no, it's a challenge. It's hard work. Often, you're right. The items don't go directly from the United States to the prohibited location. They get transshipped, sort of through a third country, or they get sold to a distributor, who then sends to a distributor, who then sends to a distributor, who then sends it somewhere it's not supposed to go. And so we spend a lot of time thinking about that. I'd say a couple of things. First, we have people stationed overseas. Our export control officers, and we send them to do what are called end-use checks. Sometimes before a license is issued, to make sure that the person who's trying to buy the item is who they say they are and are going to use it for the purpose that it's represented on the license application. Other times it's after the license has been granted and the item is shipped. We go to make sure the item's still there and hasn't moved on. So that's one way we gather information. We have classified information that we review regularly that sometimes tracks the movement of items like that. And then we have other investigative techniques as well. And when we find that something has gone, for example, in your hypothetical, through UAE onto Russia, we do have options. We have enforcement options depending on the fact pattern, either administrative or criminal, but we also have the entity list as an option. So if that UAE company wittingly sort of received this item, deceived the US seller, and then shipped that item onto Russia, that UAE company is a very good candidate for our entity list.
I recall when I was doing this in the government, I once sent we had a field office in Beijing, which I assume you still have.
We do have export control officers in Beijing.
Yeah, good. And I sent him to Xinjiang to do a post-shipment check to see if an item that had been lawfully exported was where it was supposed to be doing what it was supposed to do, which were sort of two separate questions. And it turned into a multi-day odyssey. His Jeep got stuck in the sand. It was out in the middle of the desert. In the end, it was where it was supposed to be doing what it was supposed to do, so it was a successful encounter. Have you found any, how are the Chinese cooperating on this these days?
Yeah, so we had, especially during COVID and coming out of COVID, we had an issue. Our end-use checks weren't getting scheduled as quickly as we needed them to be. We did a policy change around that time. It wasn't China specific, it's country agnostic, but it basically says if we ask to schedule an end-use check and that end-use check is not scheduled within 60 days, then we can't tell whether that company is reliable, and we're going to put them on our unverified list. And then if another 60 days go by, we can't get them scheduled, we're going to start the process of putting them on the entity list. And so that policy had a big impact. And since that went into effect, we've had actually pretty good cooperation with the Chinese authorities on getting our checks scheduled.
Yeah, I really commend you guys on that. That never occurred to me. And it's brilliant because it sends a clear signal, and it's sort of a neutral signal, that we simply want to check.
Yeah.
And if you don't want us to check, then there's some steps that we can take that will make things a lot more complicated for you. And I'm glad to hear that it seems to be having a positive effect. Have you encountered that? Have you had to use it anywhere besides China?
Well, the policy is
for everybody,
is
right.
Agnostic, and yeah, there's sometimes we have trouble scheduling checks, and then we have conversations and hopefully get them unstuck. But if not, that's our policy, and we'll put people on the unverified list.
So a lot of this really depends, I think, particularly the checks, on your field staff. How many countries are you in right now?
Yeah, so we definitely don't have as many people as we like. I don't know the number of countries, but I think we have about, I think it's 11 overseas, and they are responsible for not just the country they're located in, but a whole geographic region. We supplement them. And we just added 2 recently through the money Congress gave us as part of the Ukraine supplemental. We were able to put an export control officer, one in Finland and one in Taiwan. So those are new. That's helpful. And again, they cover more than just those countries. And we supplement them. We have folks here who we will sort of send on end-use check trips to regions of the world where we don't have a full-time export control officer. We don't currently have anyone in South America. That's something I'd like to remedy when we have the budget to do it. But in the interim, we have people fly from the U.S. down, and we'll arrange a bunch of checks in Brazil, for example, and they'll go and they'll knock out all those checks all at once.
I assume you also are able to cooperate with other federal government agencies in your efforts, both here, but also over embassies and overseas. So can you say a little bit about who they are? I mean, agents, not individuals, but I assume the Department of Justice, but I assume you also have a working relationship with Customs and Border Protection.
We do.
Other agencies?
Yeah, we do. We work very closely with partners. I'll give you a couple of examples. So let's start domestically. We, about a year and a half ago, stood up something called the Disruptive Technology Strike Force. We co-lead that with the Department of Justice, and then it also involves the FBI, Homeland Security Investigations, and Defense Criminal Investigative Service from DCIS, from the Defense Department. And so the way that works is designed particularly to focus on these sensitive disruptive technologies like hypersonics, like quantum, like AI, and make sure they're not going where they're not supposed to. We have 17 locations around the United States where we have a prosecutor from DOJ, a DCIS agent, an HSI agent, an FBI agent, and a BIS agent working together on these problems. And then we have an analytics cell here in DC that is sending them leads and helping on that front too. And the strike force has had real success so far. I think we have nearly 20 charged cases since we started the strike force a year and a half ago on the criminal side, as well as we had some administrative enforcement as well. And abroad, of course, we work very closely with other partners in the embassy from sort of the alphabet soup of government agencies.
What kind of cooperation do you get from other governments, allied governments?
So look, I think, and I should have mentioned domestically too, we have a very close working relationship with Treasury, and we've put out a lot of joint industry guidance, I think for the first time ever, with Treasury counterparts like OFAC, so it'll be like OFAC and us and DOJ and DHS or state, to tell companies or banks what we expect of them. We've done guidance with FinCEN. For international partners, excellent working relationships. So Russia in particular, Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, I think really rallied a lot of countries around the world to come together and put in parallel export controls restricting the flow of items to Russia. And that meant on the enforcement side, we really wanted to ramp up our international enforcement coordination as well, because as everyone I think knows, right, export controls need, multilateral is best, right? If it's just one country restricting the item and other companies can still sell that item to the place you don't want the item to go, it's not as effective. All you've done is hurt, your own country's business, and the bad guys still get the stuff. So better to work together. We've done a couple of things. We've created what we call the Export Enforcement 5. It's basically the Five Eyes countries, although we were told that name is only for the intelligence arrangement, so we had to come up with our own name, which is Export Enforcement 5, or E5. We tried to be cool. I don't know if we succeeded. And they're going to, actually, the 5 countries are coming to the United States next week to have a conference to share best practices and information with one another and coordinate on these exact issues. We also have been doing work through the G7, and I think there's another meeting coming up of a export enforcement working group there. And then we also have established, I mentioned the strike force, which is our domestic effort. We have the Disruptive Technology Protection Network, which is us working with governments of South Korea and Japan on these issues too, and helping them build their enforcement capacity and sharing information and strategies.
So I want to circle back now to companies and corporations, because that seems to be the core of where you begin, because it's the companies that make the stuff that is subject to control. Talk a little bit about what makes for a successful relationship or a successful partnership between your office and industry, and also what you do about outreach, what you do for outreach, and how you actually make contact with these people. Is it only when there's a problem, or is it broader than that?
Yeah. Well, let me start with the back part of that. Yeah, definitely broader than that. Look, we're the Department of Commerce. We work closely with business. We would much rather help companies comply with our rules on the front end rather than have to enforce violations of them on the back end. And the primary reason for that is when we're enforcing on the back end, it usually means that the items we care about have already gone where we don't want them to go, and the national security harm has already happened. We would much rather work with companies, explain our rules, help them comply so that that item never goes where it's not supposed to go in the first place. We do that a bunch of ways. I mentioned all the documents and guidance that we've put out already to try and help educate companies about like what are red flags they should be looking out for, what do we expect from them, what are tools they can use to try to avoid getting in trouble, what are some maybe some certifications they want to do or some checks they want to do before they export sensitive items. But our agents in particular, yeah, they're federal agents. As I said, they have badges and guns, but they also have a core part of their job. It's actually part of their performance plan that they do outreaches to companies. We don't want the first time agents are meeting companies to be when something has gone wrong. We want our agents to develop relationships with companies and companies to develop relationships with our agents in order to help them make sure that they are doing things the right way and protecting their sensitive technologies from going places that they shouldn't. We also have, it's not on my side of BIS, but it's on the still within BIS, there's an Office of Exporter Services. Their full-time job is to help exporters navigate the process and understand how to comply with our rules. And so folks can reach out to them. They're here in DC, but our agents are all across the country, and no matter where a company is located, we have an agent responsible for that geographical area, even if they're not physically present there full time, and they're happy to come and talk and build a relationship.
The items you're dealing with, or the technologies that you're dealing with, really by definition are cutting edge. You know, the things that have military applications, but also at sort of the high end of technology development. I suspect that means that dealing not only with large established companies, say in the semiconductor sector that do this, but also trying to find startups that may have a really cool idea, and somebody from China comes in and offers them $200 million for the company, and maybe they don't ask too many questions, and they don't know the rules and you don't know them because, in the Hewlett-Packard case, they're in the garage someplace, just getting started. How big a problem is that, and how do you deal with it?
Yeah, so acquiring the company wholesale is a problem, but it's a problem my friend at the Treasury Department who runs CSIS has to worry about. We worry more about the selling the items or the technologies, not the acquiring of the whole company. It is a problem. It's just the Treasury Department handles that. Look, I think that's a huge risk area because the larger companies have the resources to invest in export compliance. My message since I've been in this role has been that because the world has shifted, that the need to invest in export compliance has increased, and that for companies that think about this as a fairly technical, obscure sort of thing, yeah, we have a trade compliance guy or gal, we'll be fine. I think the risk of getting it wrong on our rules is now more existential for companies, given the increased importance and increased enforcement posture of the Department of Justice and of us. But it's the smaller companies that I often worry about because they don't have the trade compliance department. They're, like you said, they're sort of running a million miles a minute, and this may not be top of their to-do list. And so it's something we're concerned about. It's one of the reasons I like doing events like this, to try and get the word out as broadly as possible. And it's one of the reasons why we put so many resources on the website. I mentioned the Office of Exporter Services earlier. They actually have a 60-plus page guide available on the website that talks about what you should be doing to build out a compliance program to avoid violating the export rules, right? So we try to provide resources. In addition, I don't know if this is, the people in the garage will take advantage of this, but for medium-sized or even large companies, the Office of Exporter Services has offers that if you want to come to them and say, hey, can you take a look at our compliance program, they will evaluate it for you and sort of see how it does against the standards they put out in that 60-plus page guidance document. So folks can take advantage of that too.
How do you do with universities?
Yeah, so we have yet another initiative, particularly designed to work with universities. So universities, that open collaborative research environment where they're not just working with domestic researchers but international researchers is part of what has resulted in American universities being leaders worldwide in scientific and technological innovation. That same open collaborative environment makes them a soft target for folks who want to try and obtain that technology. And so we have what we call our Academic Outreach Initiative. We are partnering with 29 universities that we selected because they have particular risk factors. Either they have specific sort of research contracts with DoD, or they have partnerships we're aware of with a university abroad that's entity listed. Things like that. And so we reached out to them. We said, do you want to partner with us? They could have said no. They all said yes. That's very happy. And so we have the assigned outreach agent that meets with them quarterly. We've provided them a bunch of webinars and trainings on specific red flags to look out for, how to do open source research, stuff like that. And then we've made those webinars available to the academic community more broadly. So we're definitely worried about the research security, and it's something that we've sort of put a lot of attention to.
I can tell you from personal experience, you have an impact. When I worked at a law firm, along with my time here at CSIS, they had a practice in this area, which I sometimes participated in. And we worked with universities, two in particular. One was a client, and the other one we just gave some had some conversations with. Both of them were large universities that have received substantial federal funding in sensitive areas, among others. And the thing I discovered was, first of all, for all their size and for all the money they got, they had, depending on which one it was, 1 or 1.5 people who assigned to deal with this problem.
Yep.
And that wasn't their only job. So they acknowledged they were woefully understaffed. But I also discovered that one thing that got their attention was when they got a call from you guys saying they wanted to pay a visit.
Yeah.
And that panic ensued.
Yeah, we've also heard from universities that, hey, you come to us. So we have another resource. It's called, we put out a booklet that's also available on our website. It's called Don't Let This Happen to You. And it's because it's a compilation of our enforcement actions, because literally we don't want this to happen to you, so you should. But the universities would tell us, hey, you use case examples with us, but they're not, university examples. And I don't know, happy to say, but I can report that in the last, I think this year, in the last definitely couple months, we've had 2 university-related cases. We had a settlement with one university, and and then another case, which is a criminal case, which didn't involve the university itself, but the university was being, used as by someone who was pretending to order items for the university, but was actually like taking them and shipping them overseas. So we have some more university-related cases that we can now talk to the academic community about.
I'm glad to hear that. I viewed it as sort of a weak link in the chain, partly because university management is complicated. Professors have their own funding streams often. They're not really interested in what the administration of the university has to tell them. So it's kind of a struggle to get the university to pay attention, devote some resources for it, but then you still have to convince the professors that it's important, and that what they're doing, even if it is in their mind collaboration, in joint research and discussion, in fact may end up being technology transfer.
Yeah, I think the good news is I think the universities are increasingly attuned to this issue. I was out in California maybe a month or 2 ago. The University of California system brought in like all their people from all their different campuses to Los Angeles for a training on exactly these issues, and they invited me to come address them to educate them more about these issues. So I think the word is out.
Well, that's good to hear, and that takes me to the next question, which is, what practical steps can industry take to strengthen their compliance programs and reduce the risk of having a visit from you?
Yeah, I think we talked about some of this already, which is first it's mindset, understanding that these violations are like both deeply detrimental to our national security, and that for that reason they have shot up the priority charts of the enforcement agencies like the Department of Justice, like the Department of Commerce, which means if you get it wrong, it's way more serious than it used to be, potentially existential. And so I think things flow from that, right? It's encourage universities and companies, to really invest in compliance on the front end. I think in ramping up our corporate enforcement, I think are trying to do two things, right? It's hold people accountable when they get it wrong, but also it's to send a message that you really need to invest in compliance on the front end. I think we can tell people you have to invest in compliance on the front end, but the thing that often moves the needle is when there is a large penalty for someone who failed to do that, and there were significant consequences. We brought last year we had a very significant. It was the largest standalone administrative penalty in our history. It was a $300 million resolution against a company that was selling hard disk drives to Huawei. I think that got people's attention. I think you're going to see more significant corporate resolutions from us. I think one thing, another piece of news I can make today. We actually just hired our first ever Chief of Corporate Enforcement at BIS. It's a guy named Raj Parekh. He comes to us from DOJ, where he was the longtime experienced national security prosecutor. He was the acting U.S. attorney and then the first assistant U.S. attorney, so second in command in the Eastern District of Virginia, which is one of the premier U.S. attorney's offices when it comes to national security enforcement. And he is going to sort of work with our agents and with the DOJ prosecutors, with our enforcement attorneys at Commerce to really help sort of drive some of these big corporate investigations we have underway across the finish line. DOJ about a year ago hired 2 people and created positions in their national security division as chief counsel, deputy chief counsel of corporate enforcement. He'll be sort of their counterpart on the Commerce side.
I was at a meeting yesterday where this issue came up, and one of the comments by a practitioner in the field was that probably the thing that made the biggest difference a few years ago was the significant increase in penalties. You found that, I assume?
Yes. So part of our overall goal is to drive compliance, right? We can only investigate and prosecute so many cases, and that has impact. But the real impact is the force multiplier effect when we get companies, both all across the country and all across the world, saying, we don't want to get in trouble with BIS or with DOJ for export violations. There's, the number of years ago, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act wasn't a statute many people had heard of, and then DOJ decided to ramp up its efforts there. And now, anywhere you go in the world, if you talk to a multinational company, they're concerned about their Foreign Corrupt Practices Act risk. And I think the message coming from DOJ and from Commerce is we want companies thinking about their national security risk, their export violation risk, the way they think about their FCPA risk. And so it's a good segue. A third thing I can tell you we did today, so you get all the news, is I said we amended the export administration regulations to institutionalize our voluntary self-disclosure policies. We amended a different part of them to make some changes to how we do our penalty guidance and penalty evaluations for our administrative cases. So I'll just highlight three changes. So the VSDs, right, those were already policies people were aware of. We were just enshrining them in federal regulations. On this stuff is new as of this morning. So it used to be that our penalty guidelines were pretty mathematical. They had like specific fixed percentages. You apply this factor, you get this percent, this factor. We wanted to make it more holistic, less sort of doing math and more like figuring out the facts and circumstances of each case. What is the appropriate penalty? Or it's actually how DOJ does it. They have a series of factors. If there's a corporate violation, they're supposed to consider those factors, figure out what the right penalty is. So here's some of the changes we made. It used to be before today that if there was a sort of what's called non-egregious, so less significant violation of our rules, even if the transaction was $1 billion, that the maximum sort of base penalty that we start with before we add in aggravating and mitigating factors was capped at $250,000. That doesn't make sense to us, given the $1 billion transaction, to cap the penalty at $250K to start, and then you can move it up or down. So we changed that as of today. The max base penalty in that situation is now the value of the transaction. So it would be the full $1 billion, and then can get mitigated up or mitigated down or aggravated up. That was thing one. Thing two, we got rid of those percentages, right? It used to be that for mitigating factors, there were some specific percentages, but there were no specific percentages for the aggravating factors. So it was sort of confusing, and it ended up to skewed results. So we got rid of the fixed percentages. And then third, I'll be curious to hear what people think about this one. Well, all of them really. But third, before our guidelines said, if you have a violation, say we impose a $10 million penalty, we could suspend some of that penalty, not just for inability to pay. We still do that. We'll still suspend the penalty if the company just doesn't have the money, if the people in the garage. But we were willing to suspend penalties so that then the company would then spend that money on compliance. Right, so $10 million penalty, we could suspend, I don't know, whatever, $4 million, and the company would then have to spend that $4 million on compliance. We got rid of that. We impose a $10 million penalty, subject to inability to pay. It's a $10 million penalty. We don't think you should be sentenced to do compliance. That's something you need to invest in on the front end, and we don't want companies feeling that they're disadvantaged because they spent money on compliance out of their pocket and other people got sentenced to it. So those are the three changes that we made today.
It's tempting to say, what would really help you out is if you were able to keep the money that you raised in
yeah,
fines.
there are, I sometimes think that, but there are, of course, real concerns about policing for profit, right? It skews the incentives if the money goes into our pocket. So everyone should know the money does not go into our pocket. It goes into either the DOJ forfeiture fund or to the Treasury General Fund. We don't make any profit based on that work we do. Although I will say, I think it does show we are a pretty good return on investment. When Congress invests in us and gives us resources, that we are able to bring back more into the federal treasury than we cost.
Well, I think the penalty increase has been a significant factor. I mean, the sums you're talking about are significant, and that makes a difference for companies. When I was there, we imposed, at that point, the biggest fine in BIS history, and it was $8 million. So now you're talking 200, 300 million. That catches people's attention, I would think. Well, it's almost time to ask the audience for questions. Let me ask you one more, and then we'll turn to them to see what they want to talk about. Put on your crystal ball, or don't put it on. Look into your crystal ball for a moment, or put on your Harry Potter hat. And what do you see the future like? How is your agency going to change going forward?
Yeah, I could do my Karnak from Johnny Carson, yeah. But given the age of the crowd, I'm not sure many people would get the reference.
They would have no clue what you're talking about.
All right, so I won't do that. Look, I think that the dynamic, that national security inflection point I talked about at the beginning, I think that's the new normal. I think these technologies and the power of them are continuing to advance at astronomical rates, which means our adversaries are going to continue their efforts to do anything in their power to obtain them, which means we need to continue to do everything in our power to stop them, to prevent them from getting those advanced technologies. Because remember, those advanced technologies they can use to then modernize their militaries to such a degree that what they're trying to do is leapfrog our military capacity and ultimately change the balance of power in the world. So the stakes couldn't be higher, and I think that remains true no matter what administration is trying to figure out how to deal with this problem. I think there is going to continue to be for the foreseeable future, unfortunately, significant need to continue to protect these advanced technologies from getting where they shouldn't, and that the work of BIS is only going to continue to rise in profile and importance, along with all of our partners.
So, audience, it's your turn. If you have oh my goodness. Let's start in the front row. We'll give Bharat the first question, then we'll go to the second row. Say your name, affiliation, and ask a question. Don't give a speech.
Hi, Assistant Secretary. Lovely to meet you again. I'm a senior fellow in the project on train technology. My question is a simple enough question, but arguably the most difficult one, which is how does BIS think about and define success metrics for export controls? And of course, any measure of success or failure is technology specific. So perhaps for hypersonic missiles, 1 or 2 missiles going to a rogue state might be one too many. But in the context of AI chips, which as you know is what I'm interested in, perhaps a few hundred chips going to China might not be a problem. But if they're having access to tens of thousands of chips and can train a frontier AI model, maybe that's a problem. But maybe even then, if China only smuggles 50,000 chips and the US has access to 500,000 chips domestically, maybe the technological lead is being grown and preserved. So my question is, given how lean BIS is and the challenges of enforcement, how do you think about success metrics for fast evolving technologies where arguably the goalposts are constantly shifting?
Yeah, it's a great question, Bharat, and thanks for asking it. So I think a couple of things. One, to be clear, this is not the type of area where we're ever going to bat 1,000. In other words, like the goal, success is not stopping every single item from getting where it shouldn't. That's impossible. And so the goal, and I think the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, sort of outlined this well in an important speech he gave, it was probably nearly 2 years ago now at Georgetown, which is the U.S. national security strategy for a long time had been, we want to maintain a relative lead in these technologies. In other words, as our technologies advance, it's okay if we let more and more go of the older stuff because we're still ahead. And that the strategy now is we want to maintain as large a lead as possible. So I think we want to stop as much as we can. I don't have fixed metrics for that. We do have some other metrics I'll talk about in a second. But we look at impact. So we look at both. We get classified reporting about the impact our work is having, and we get statistics about items and the number of items that are flowing. The goal is to reduce the number, to degrade, to impede, to slow down. So if you take the U.S. problem of U.S. microelectronics ending up in Russian missile systems and drones, that's something we are intently focused on. We're never going to get it to zero, but we want to reduce those trade flows, and it's why I was in Turkey, about a month ago, showing them statistics, saying, look at all these items that are flowing through your country and getting to Russia. We've had similar conversations with the Chinese, and I was also when I was in Beijing, and also when I was in Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, right? So we're working on we can evaluate, we can get some sense of impact both from trade data and from sort of classified reporting. Then we've also done a lot on sort of our side, on the effort side, to make sure that we are doing, like I said, squeezing every last ounce out of our finite resources. So the fiscal year for the government's about to end at the end of September. This was our first fiscal year where we had program in place for our agents and analysts that for the supervisors, part of their performance evaluation is how many, what the mix of their cases or leads look like. And we have categories of what are our highest priority things, and we want to make sure that most of the cases, most of the leads are hitting against our highest priorities. So it doesn't really get to impact, but it's another thing that we're doing to try and drive the organization. I told folks on my very first day, given the math, which is, I forget what the numbers were, but it's something like 40 million dual-use exports out of the United States a year, and we have 200 people. So those numbers aren't super great. What it means is you have to, I said to folks, every day you should be asking yourself, not just, is this an investigation that I'm doing worth doing, but is it worth doing more than all the other investigations I could be doing? There's huge opportunity cost to using your time on something that is less important over something that is more important, and we're trying to be very clear about what the highest priority things are, including AI chips to China. Just had another meeting internally on that yesterday. That's something that is right at our top of our priority list, and so we're doing a whole bunch of things on the effort side to make sure we're getting after that problem.
Okay, second person over here on the second row.
Oh, thank you. Robert Delaney, South China Morning Post. I just found your comments about the Chinese authorities being very cooperative with the end-use checks very interesting, especially given the environment we're in now, where the U.S. government has taken many punitive measures against the Chinese government, which has also sort of in response become very defensive about it. So I just wondered if you could give us a little bit more detail about that. What do you think is behind that cooperative attitude? And do you sense that the economic turbulence that the Chinese economy is seeing right now, is that factoring in at all? Thank you.
Yeah. Interesting question. I don't know enough to to give an answer on the last point. But I will say, I think, as I think I said before, I think what spurred them to action actually was the policy shift, right? So I think what got our end-use checks unstuck in China was the threat of lots of their companies going on the unverified list and then on the entity list, because that makes it harder for them to get U.S. items. So I think when we sort of put this policy in place, again, country agnostic, but it had the real impact of unsticking those checks, and I think that is still largely what's driving things. In other words, the Chinese government does not want their companies on our lists. They get very upset when their companies go on our lists. And so they want to avoid that when possible, and part of that is facilitating our end-use checks. Look, it's not, nothing's perfect, but the difference sort of from before and after, I think, is significant, especially since the backlog really built up during COVID. Then even after COVID was over here, you may recall, it was still a real issue there because of the zero COVID lockdown policies. When they were coming out of that, that's when they had their COVID problem, and that's when we were trying to get a lot of these checks done, and the Chinese government really, it wasn't easy logistically, either for the folks from the Ministry of Commerce there or for our folks who had to go, through still a COVID, infected country to try and get these checks done. And so I, credit to our team and their team on that one issue. There's still lots of issues where we disagree, of course, but I think on the end-use checks, we've made some progress.
Okay, we need to go over here. Woman in the second row.
Hi, thank you so much. Emily Sullivan with JP Morgan. I wanted to ask a little bit about the new quantum controls, I believe, out last Friday. It seemed like there was a really high degree of coordination with allies and partners in this particular case. I wanted to ask what's novel about the cooperation on quantum and whether that makes your job easier.
Sure. Yeah, no, thanks for the question. So I'm going to start with a caveat, which is that at BIS there are, well, now when Bill was there were two sides of the house. Now there are actually three. But I run enforcement. My colleague Taya Kendler runs the export administration, which does all the policy, all the rules like that. The rule I announced today is I think the first rule we've done on our enforcement side since I've been there. Almost all the rules are her team, and that one was as well. The third side of the house, by the way, now is ICTS. They do the the Kaspersky rule was their rule. Anyway, getting back to quantum. So I think I can answer your question. Just take the caveat that it wasn't my team, and so I'm not fully tracking. I think what was. I think worked very closely with partners and allies. In fact, I think some of our partners and allies actually put those rules out in place before we did. I think we were paralleling what some of the other partners and allies did. And I think the thing that is sort of newer about it is that it is lots before, I don't know how far back, but certainly before Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, maybe even prior to that, right? There's a group of countries that, I'm going to get really nerdy on trade stuff, the Wassenaar arrangement is what it's called. That's the group of countries, and they operated by consensus to put controls in place that were then across all the countries. Russia is one of the members of the Wassenaar arrangement, so if you're going to work by consensus, that hasn't gone, as well lately as it used to. And so I think what happened is sort of all the other countries, or most of the other countries, got together to put in parallel controls outside of the sort of formal Wassenaar arrangement, but sort of to try to parallel what would have happened through the Wassenaar arrangement if Russia was still sort of fully cooperative. I think that's what happened, but again, not my lane, so I might have that wrong.
Do you have another minute or two? Or
Yeah, I got time.
All right, let's be, back row over there. We'll get two or three more questions in, and then we'll have to stop.
Thanks. Ian Stewart. I'm with the James Martin Centre for Non-Proliferation Studies, and I work closely with quite a lot of your team, so thank you for doing this. I have a question about data analysis and data analysis tools. And I think your boss actually, the Undersecretary, has talked about this last year and so on. In fact, so has CSIS. With the hope and aspiration that big data analysis tools, platforms could be quite transformational to the type of work that's done, especially on your side of the house, actually. And then I think there was some aspiration or hope that with the supplementals that maybe some of that could be used for this purpose, but I don't think I've heard any updates in the last year on that. So is that, where is that sitting? Are you hiring data people? Are you, where does that fit in the larger scheme?
Yeah, no, thanks. It's a great question. So as I said, we have a big part of my team are analysts who do sort of analyze data all the time, and we have folks on Assistant Secretary Kendler's team too that do a lot of data analysis, particularly trade data. Those when I was in Turkey, to be able to show them the trade flows of items going through Turkey to Russia, that sort of information was compiled in-house by our data analysts. But we do need those sort of tools, like analytic tools and technology to help. We have some, but we are working on more. The trick is funding. So we're working on getting the funding that we need, because those tools can be expensive, but they also, I mentioned the force multiplier earlier, right? They're huge force multipliers, right? If we don't get funding to bring on more people, which we also need, funding for analytic tools that allow the people we do have to be more efficient and to save them time each day in how they sort of crunch the data and illuminate sort of things going where they shouldn't, so then we can cut a lead to the field or build an analyst package. Those tools are essential. So we have access. We're getting more access and sort of building them, but to really sort of sustain that effort, we're gonna need some more money.
And just a short commercial. We've done 2 papers on this on enforcement in this area. One, the more recent one, involving the use of AI to help you do the analytical work that you just talked about. So if this is an area of interest, I'd go to our website and look up the Scholl Chair, and you'll see 2 of our papers that deal directly with various enforcement tools. We had a question here in the front row. Well, not the front row, second row.
Kazuo work a research associate at the Trans-Pacific Group, a
Just
Japanese.
talk into the microphone. I'm having.
Oh yeah, Kazuo work a research associate at the Trans-Pacific Group, a Japanese political risk consultancy firm. I have a question about the international collaboration issues. Bloomberg at the beginning of this September reported that some Chinese senior officers warned Japanese counterparts of the severe economic retaliations if Japan further restricts the export of the chip-making equipment. So having said that, the question I'd like to ask might be, if China really do such kind of retaliations against Japan or Netherlands or any like-minded countries other than the United States, are there any potential plans your department are considering to take in collectively countering against such retaliations of China? If there is any specific plan or any idea about that, I would appreciate if, some explanation.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. That one I think really is much more on the sort of the other side of BIS, that sort of the questions of what rules get put in place and what the impact is with respect to China, what the impact is with respect to Japan, and how to navigate all that. Very sort of complicated, difficult issues to grapple with. You're right to ask about them. They're not issues that I have to grapple with on the front end. When rules get in place, my team enforces them, but we're not the ones who are crafting those rules or putting them in place.
All right, I think we have time for one more, and here it is right here.
Hi, my name's Andy. I'm a graduate student at the Georgetown School of Foreign Service. My question was regarding the export of intangible data exports, like the ECAD design, chip design software. And I was curious to know what changes to enforcement processes BIS has made regarding this, what it plans to do, and if there's any additional government agencies that you've expanded your cooperation with. Thank you.
Yeah. So it's a great question. So intangibles, right? So software that can be, or design drawings that can be exported with like the click of a mouse is hard for us, right? You don't have like bills of lading or shipping doc, stuff that often are useful investigative tools for us. So it's a challenge. It's something we're concerned about and thinking about. It's something that the Disruptive Technology Strike Force is focused on. We brought a couple of cases through the strike force. One, I think a former Google engineer has been charged, it's still pending, with taking sort of AI technology, IP, or trying to take it to China. So that's like one type of case that where we're really focused on the transfer of intangible, of intellectual property, if it's export control. And so the controls do reach that type of technology depending on how sensitive it is. It's just, it can be even more of it can be a challenge for our agents to know sort of when it's transferred. So we have to rely on sort of additional investigative tools. Sometimes, that'll show up in classified reporting. Sometimes we'll have, an insider at a company will let us know that they think a colleague has done something off, and so there are ways to get at it, but it's harder than when physical items are being exported.
Well, and with that, we're well over time. Matt, you've been generous with your time, and we appreciate it. And we've covered a lot of ground, I think very enlightening. Thank you for doing it. Thank you for coming. And thank you all to the audience for participating.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.